As David already mentioned, my name is Matt Ackerman. I'm from Swine Veterinary Services in Greensburg, Indiana. I've practiced there for the past 16 years with Dr. Larry Roof and Dr. Dennis Villani. Greensburg's in beautiful southeastern Indiana, halfway between Indianapolis, Indiana, and Cincinnati, Ohio. And historically, we've covered about a 3-hour radius, but as clients continue to consolidate and expand, we continue to travel a little further. We travel into Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, and my partner, Dr. Roof, just got back from his second trip for 2 weeks, twice a year to Southeast Asia. So we travel where the pigs are. I appreciate David giving me the opportunity to come and talk about the impact of pig market weight variation on marketing decisions. And while I've got this slide up here following up on Dr. DeRoshi, it's always intimidating to see so many facts, figures, and p-values for a practitioner like myself. So please just remember that if I contradict anything that he says or any of the other speakers, that they were telling you how to do it right, and I'm merely telling you how we do it in southeastern Indiana. So when I said that I'd speak, I asked David for a little more feedback on how to do what he wanted me to talk about. And he just said, share how you've used the full value pig model to capture marketing opportunity, what's been your return, and how have you gotten it implemented, and try and wrap that up in 30 to 45 minutes. So as I took those objectives and thought about it, I broke it down into these 3 topics. How do we define a full value pig? How do we measure and value a full value pig? And how do we produce a full value pig? So I'll try and spend about 10 minutes on each of those 3 topics. So if I get wandering one way or the other, you know that I'll be coming back to these 3 main topics overall in my presentation today. So part 1, what does a full value pig mean to me as a veterinarian and to my clients? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, whether that's full value pigs or grade A pigs or non-deduct hogs or maximum value swine. My own opinion on this has evolved over time, and I'll share with you 3 different ways that I've looked at this historically. In 1995 to 1998, I looked at this as the no sort loss version. My goal is I went out to my clients and talked to them that the ideal place on a grid to sell a pig is where no sort loss is deducted. And so we'd take a kill sheet and we'd go out to the farm and we'd say, hey, you have any kill sheets laying around? They'd say, yeah. And I'd say, have you ever looked at them? No, we just rip the check off the front, cash that, and throw those in that pile right over there. So I'm like, okay, this is an opportunity for us to dig into some data. So what we'd do is we'd take the kill sheet and we'd take the packer grid and we'd put a big box around that and say, okay, these are the no deduct hogs. 170 to 206 is about 220 to 270. That's the range. We'll average 245. That's where you want to be. We'll look at the kill sheets. We'll add up how much sort loss is on there. And as long as it's close to 0, we're real happy. If it's a buck 100 weight, we're going to be real disappointed. So we'd measure that. We'd put that into spreadsheets. We'd report that back to clients. And then we'd look at other packer kill sheets and other grids and do the same thing. And over time, their grids would change. And it'd be 240 to 290. And somewhere in 260 range is where we'd want to be selling for that packer. And we'd do the same analysis, put that into a spreadsheet, report that back to the grow finish crew. Well, that was all going along well and good. It was a nice, simple thing to do. It was easy to do. And so if it was easy and simple, it must be right. Well, as I got doing a slaughter check one day down at a packing plant, one of the car buyers said to me, hey, you've got a client now that's sending us 100,000 pigs last year. I'm like, yeah, things are growing, getting bigger. He said, well, you know, they've got $1 per hundredweight, $1 per pig in this case. It was probably at times closer to $1 a hundredweight, but $1 per pig sort loss. It was $100,000 worth of sort loss. And he said to me, I'd like you to go back home and tell that client that if they'll hire me for $50,000, I'll save them $100,000. One day a week, I'll go through and mark all their pigs, and all they have to do is load up the ones I mark. They'll make money, I'll make money, we'll all be happy. So I said, well, I'll pass the message along. So I went back home and shared that with my client, and he said, well, I think he's wrong about that that's not going to save me any money. I said, well, of course it is, and showed him, $100,000. And he said, well, prove to me that that sort loss is really hurting me. And I said, well, okay. He goes, yeah, I'll hire you to develop however you want to explain it to me. Probably one of those spreadsheet things you use. I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I went from my maximum value pig. I went and developed the maximum value pig spreadsheet that we use in our clinic and the single pig Optimum, where we basically look at different weights and different ranges. And I just took a selection of this. It went over here to 350 at some point and went all the way down to 220. But I've just got a subset here of 260 to 295. So basically going to 30-pound range. And what I did is I just looked at the check. So the check that came back, the gross revenue, of course, as you have more pounds, the gross revenue is going to go up. And then I put the next line, I put sort loss. And so then I have sort loss kicking in, 65 cents a hundredweight, $1.40 a pig, $1.30 a hundredweight, $2.86 a pig, and took it on out across. And basically then took our check, so you took the gross revenue minus the sort loss and got to the gross revenue, net revenue, I should say, from the packer. And then if you look at the feed cost, marginal feed cost, with my assumptions in there, then we took margin over feed cost and looked at our marginal revenue over our marginal cost. And so as we got down to the bottom line and looked at those variables over live weight, what we found is as we went heavier, we made more money. And of course, this is back in the time when corn was $2. So this, don't panic if you're like, well, that's way too heavy. Yeah, that's back when corn was $2, but the same principles apply today. And so I was able to show that producer, that he was right and I was wrong, which is a great way to learn. But basically, it was worth $10 more a pig for us to take those pigs up there to $2.90, even though we were giving $2 back on all those $3 back on some of those pigs. It was still more money over in this zone. And my producer just said to me, hey, Matt, if I give you $3 and you give me 10 back, I'm going to play that game all day long. And I couldn't really argue with that. I said, well, there's other costs associated with this. You know, you can't just take them 30 pounds heavier and it's not like it's all free cost. He said, well, it's your next biggest cost. Well, it's going to be building space. You're going to have more weeks. Well, how many more weeks? Well, if it's 30 pounds and they're doing a 1.5 average daily gain, very conservatively, that's 20 days. 20 days at 10 cents a day, you're paying, what, $36, $40 if you can find finishing space. Divide by 365 days in a year, it's 10 cents a day. 20 days at 10 cents a day, it's $2. He goes, okay, I'll give you $5, you give me $9. We'll play that way for a while. Well, what about increased mortality? And so we just kept playing the game, and at the end of the day, it didn't really matter. He was still winning the heavier took those pigs. And so at some point, I left off the numbers over here where you get to $5 a hundredweight and $10 a hundredweight. At some point, marginal cost does exceed marginal revenue. But within this limited scope, that's where he was winning. So I went on with that model for quite some time, and of course we took pigs heavier in our area. My clients took pigs heavier, and we'd measure and report back to people off the single pig optimum the percent that were too light, the percent that were just right, and the percent that were too heavy. Once again, pretty easy. You just draw 3 lines on the kill sheet that came back. You were easily able to calculate the percent that were below your 40-pound range that you were wanting to be. So if we used 290, 250 to 290 or whatever range you want to use and said, okay, this percent were too light, this percent was just right, this percent is too heavy. So we were going along doing that, and I got talking with Craig Rolls, who said, hey, have you looked at Dennis DePietri's model lately? And I'm like, no, I'm a little out of loop on that. So he said, you need to give Dennis a call. So I called Dennis DePietri, and he started challenging some of my assumptions, and Elanco was working on developing their full value pig, and we decided that we all needed to get together and look at some data. We had a number of clients that were up on MetaFarms, so we could have individual carcass data versus just using the closeouts and using the averages. We were able to get the individual carcass data imported from the packer, exported into a format that we could analyze in Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Access. And so at that point, we started looking more at the population optimized, profit maximizing model that the full value pig is. And of course, in that time, ethanol policy and world demand for our grain was driving our feed costs up, which also put quite a bit of weight on whether our marginal feed cost and marginal feed consumption and conversion were accurate in my model, where you could be, your sensitivity didn't have to be so tight in the old days. So this takes me down to part 1 of how we define a full value pig. And the full value pig, according to the Elanco definition, is the pigs that achieve 90% of the single pig profit optimum. And, like within the industry, on pigs weaned per maid female per year, once we are able to define that and measure that, then we're able to make change. And so I appreciate Elanco sticking their neck out there. Is that the exact right definition for the full value pig? Well, we'll look at it a little bit and you can decide. But if we can apply that information to the entire population versus my single pig optimum, we do get quite a bit of different results when we look at all the individuals that make up that population. One of the reports that the full value pig model reports back is return over feed cost. And what I quickly found out when they sent me this chart is that while I was looking at percent too light, percent too heavy, and percent just right, my clients didn't really care if they were 5 pounds too heavy or 50 pounds too heavy. Well, if they were too heavy, that's all the guys in the barn were getting fed back to them, and they weren't really keeping track of how many pigs were too heavy. So what this chart is right here is each individual dot is an individual pig, individual carcass, I should say, that's gone through the packer. And what they did is they took our feed costs and our fixed costs, and they applied the return over feed cost to each of the individual carcasses based on their percent lean and carcass weight. So each dot is an individual pig, and the darker and thicker and blacker they get, the more pigs there are. This is about 10,000 pigs. What they do is they sample your population and attribute that to about 10,000 dots for the model to analyze. And then you can see that pigs were making $20 over here and up to $60, $50 over here, and then going back down to zero and infinity and beyond over here. What's interesting about showing this graph to me and how that was like, whoa, we're out of control on the top end, I showed this to one of our barn guys who was in charge of the selection crew, and he said, Matt, you don't understand. We are tight on space. We don't have any extra weeks to raise these pigs. And I'm like, well, you don't need any more weeks. We're too heavy. We're not too light. We're too heavy. And so it was just interesting to me, that disconnect between the man who was in charge of the production cycle and the information that we were trying to feed back to him. So we're trying right now to make it simpler and clearer to them that this is what we're looking for, is we're trying to get all the pigs in this zone right here, according to the definition. Now, you and I all know that that's not possible because they're not all going to cut 59% and they're not all going to make it into that right weight. But we can either change the definition to say, well, let's use an average lean like 55 or 54 or 53 and base it off of that so that we make ourselves feel better about how many pigs are achieving 90% of profit maximum, or we can deal with the reality of the situation that these pigs are not making the weight in the lean where they would make us the most money. And then we'll have to define some acceptable limits within that. As David said, we've got to be looking at the variance that ends up with the profitability over our cost. So if you look at the slope on these lines, what you see is a slow ramp up on this side as you take the pigs heavier, just like in my single pig Optimum. You're making more money as those pigs get heavier. But what you see on the other side is what Dennis DePetri affectionately refers to as the Mayan Temple of Doom, because each step you take heavier, it's catastrophic how much drop there is on each of those weight breaks once you get beyond that marginal cost, marginal revenue, profit maximization area. So we just need to make sure that we're feeding that information back to the crew so that they can center that population back in the optimum where we want to be. And so that's what we're trying to do as we move forward. I'll show you a number of different ways that we're doing that, but that is the overall full value pig model in a nutshell. And so what I tell my clients when I try and take this model out to them and get them excited about it, it's intimidating to them. They like production. They don't like marketing. They don't like anything to do with the kill sheet analysis, a lot of data stuff. So I just explain to them, hey, this is a really cool tool that gives us the way of measuring, monitoring, and maximizing profitability. And that's what you want to do, is you want to be more profitable. That's why you're hiring me. And I'll be glad to help you work to determine the optimal selling weight based on your feed cost, your selling price, your futures contracts, your lean and yield, your packer grid, and then we'll apply this information back based on your population dynamics versus the old flat model that we were using that made us feel good about doing the wrong thing. The other thing that they've done is Elanco's taken it to the next step where they have different vectors, vector 1, vector 2, vector 3, 4, 5, 6. And the vectors 1 through 3 are the animals that are not lean enough. And then either too light over here, these are going to be lean enough, but too light, just right weight, too heavy, and not lean enough, too heavy and lean enough. What's interesting about these vectors is people get all bent out of shape, my producers. Well, there's not much we can do about those pigs. Good, there's $19,000 of opportunity on this page and only $3,000 of it's up here. Right here's where all the opportunity really is, in this box where we think we're doing the right thing. This 40-pound box is not really getting us where we want to be. And what's interesting is even as I was measuring this and reporting this back to people, if you have a 30 to 40-pound window and you ask people how many of their pigs are getting marketed in that range, of the pigs that go into the finisher are getting marketed in that range, well, they don't want to talk about the number of pigs that went into the finishing system. That's the 27-week black box that we don't really want to talk about. We'll just talk about the pigs that actually made it to town. The pigs that actually made it to town, it's a lot of times 60 to 70% would be, 70 would be some of my best numbers initially when we start this. They'll tell you it's 90 to 95% of the pigs that are making it in that 40-pound window. But I'll show you some stats here later on that back up the fact that it's about 60% just based on standard deviation alone. So if you look at the opportunity, it's still right there in that box. And as I showed you earlier, these pigs, while we think we're limiting on space, a lot of times we're just not getting the right cuts out of the barn. Or in the other case where we've got contract finishers that are more interested in getting the barn emptied and washed and turned around before the next group, we're a lot of times on the light end of those things. So topic number 2, how do we measure and value the full value pig? We do that by capturing the data. That's where we have to begin. And as I said, we're using MetaFarms to utilize and capture that data. We're able to code that in by producer, by site, by flow, by cut or load out of the barn, who marked the pigs and who loaded the pigs. And I think this is as good a time as any to disclaim that I do consulting work for Elanco, I do consulting work for MetaFarms, I do consulting work for various and sundry people. David, I know you've always challenged us to be open, honest, and ethical with our affiliations, so there are some of those. And what's interesting is I work for those companies and I still like their stuff, so not always can you say that. But they've got some really neat tools, but you don't have to use any of those tools to do some of the same things I'm going to talk to you about. As long as your packer is willing to provide you back the individual carcass data, which more and more are now. Before, they sent me a packet full of paper copies of the individual carcass data. I told them that wasn't really what I had in mind. I was hoping they'd email me a CSV file. But you can download that from a lot of the packers yourself. You can pull it into Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Access. But as with any tool, if it isn't automated, it's probably not going to happen on a regular basis. That's what I love about these tools is it's automated, allows you to pull the information directly in. All I have to do is go out to the MetaFarms website, click on my login, hop into their reporting system, sow manager, finishing manager, sales manager, click on the data transfer exports, data exports, and I can get whatever range, whatever packer, whatever producer, and I can analyze it by cut out of the barn, who loaded those pigs, who marked those pigs. And the beauty is it's all linked into the full value pig. All I have to do is click get data. It's going to grab a sample of 10,000 records or whatever I want, 2,000 or 10,000 are my choices right now, date range, and then I'm able to punch on these right out on the web and crunch those numbers by tomorrow morning for my herd visit. You can click down there, choose your companies, choose your criteria, such as whether you want to look at site or producer, and then the values. You can choose individual barns, or you can choose multiple barns. I can choose multiple quads, or however I want to look at it, what packer and what feeding program, including the feed budget that we're using within the system, feed costs for that. So that's how we're currently doing that. Describing the data is how we talk about variation. As David mentioned earlier, I think we're really good about talking about sow farms. I don't think we're so good, at least I'm not so good, about talking about grow finish information and talking to my producers in a way that they value and understand about statistics and about the carcass information that we're using. So what I try and do is break it down to hog farmer statistics, where I just tell them, hey, the average is the middle of the data set, the standard deviation is the spread, and my favorite is coefficient of variation. I know David likes variation. I like coefficient of variation, the standardized spread. We'll come back and talk a little bit about that one. Bob Morrison introduced me to that concept many years ago, and I've continued to use it and misuse it to my heart's content. So we'll talk about that. On sow farms, I break it down to throughput, efficiency, and quality. On every one of my herd visits, this is what I'm going to talk about. Throughput pays the bills. I'm going to push throughput. We're going to have goals directed towards wean pig output, and all of our goals are going to be focused back into wean pig output. I'm not going to let them focus on efficiency like pre-weaning mortality unless they override that with the number of pigs weaned. I tell them they can work either harder or they can work smarter. That's their choice. On the efficiency side of things, sometimes we'll incentivize them, but we try and avoid incentivizing them on efficiency without first incentivizing them heavier on throughput, because they will do what you incentivize them to do. If you look at quality, the average out weight of the nursery out of the farrowing house, or average wean weight, however we can track that, because we have to have a good quality pig coming into our system. Otherwise, we take the good quality pig, we take the less than quality pigs and subtract that off their wean numbers, and they don't fully appreciate that. But we can't have pigs disappearing from the farrowing house to the nursery on our record-keeping system. We can't have pigs disappearing from the nursery to the finisher on a record-keeping system. There are no such things as free pigs in our system that kind of go along until in case they die, the 50 extra pigs that we don't mark off the sheet when they die. So We can't be spotting them pigs. We want to make sure that every pig is a full value pig the moment it leaves the farrowing house or it doesn't leave the farrowing house. Throughput on the finishing side, we're doing the same basic thing on the quarterly basis. I'm trying to go back to these farms and talk to them about number of pigs sold out by phase of production. A lot of times that'll be, we're trying to market 85 to 90% of the pigs weaned out of the sow farms. So we'll have 3% nursery death loss, 4% finishing death loss, 5% light and junks, and then some cull pigs along the way that we try and get up in that range. We want to make sure we're tracking and pushing to get every pig out of the system as a full value pig. We're looking at average out weight, which is tied back into our whole full value pig model to help us determine where that is. And then we're looking at that and monitoring that based on pigs in the box or pigs in our marketing grid. If we look at the next step that we're trying to do more of, I'm trying to look more at variation, and today's more robust record-keeping systems allow us to get in there and look at the spread of the wean weight, or spread of the wean number, spread of the weight and sales number. And a lot of times that wean weight will just be a group wean weight, or we'll try and break that back out to the average pig, but we're not weighing individual pigs. We're running a semi-truck across the scales and getting a group weight. But still, that was a lot of improvement for us. So to get that weight on a regular basis back into a lot of these systems. And to get that wean number and track the week-to-week variation, decide if that's something that meets our system's needs or puts us short. And that becomes so important when production is no longer near as important as marketing. And to get your right position in marketing, you have to know how many pigs you're going to have 6 months later to hit the futures market in the grid that you've committed to, with or without PERS, usually with PERS. Statistics that define variation, average, like I said, the middle of the data set. I'm just trying to get these folks to realize that while 250, 270, 290 equals the 270 average, so does 220, 320, and 270. And that's not what we're looking for when this is what we're looking for in that 40-pound range, or tighter. So the easiest way to tell them that is with standard deviation, and they don't have to know what standard deviation means. I don't exactly know how to define it. It's something Microsoft Excel calculates for me. And so this is 20-pound standard deviation, that's good, and 50 pounds, that's bad. And I show them that on the charts, and these guys are very visual. They're out in barns looking at pigs every day. I don't want the short, fat, wide standard deviation. I want the tall, skinny variation. And we'll put some numbers to that. And if you look at 30-pound standard deviation, which is not good for our system, that's 240 to 270 to 300 would be our range. We've got a 60-pound range right there of the box. But then we have all this spillover as well. And just like I said earlier, even if you've got that down to a 30-pound window that you're trying to target 250 to 285, that only 68% of the pigs are going to fall in there mathematically. So all the other pigs are going to be outside that range. So when people tell me that they're getting 90% of the pigs in a 30 to 40-pound window, I want to get the details of their math. Coefficient of variation. This may be a little bit beyond the scope of where we want to go, but I just love this term, so I'm going to spend a little time here. Interpretation of coefficient of variation, and this is how I misuse it. It's the standard deviation divided by the average. It's a standardized standard deviation. So if I'm talking about 5%, less than 5% being excellent, 7% being good, 10% being average, and less than 10% being an area of opportunity, as I like to call it, we have a lot of areas of opportunity out on the farm. So if you look at selling pigs at 270, a 10% coefficient of variation would be 27 pounds, plus or minus 27 pounds, right back into our 30-pound standard deviation that I talked about earlier. If you look at wean weight, and your average wean weight is 12 pounds, 10% standard deviation is going to be 1.2 pounds, plus or minus is going to be your standard deviation. Look at whatever you want to weight out of the nursery, pigs weaned per sow, just take it times 10%, and then you've got your standard deviation of your system that you're trying to achieve. And if you're doing better than that, that's good stuff. So just walking through a few examples of that, because my producers, they're like, I don't really know about this coefficient of variation. Well, let's say that if we did 1,000 pigs, weaned 1,000 pigs a week, plus or minus 50 pigs, that's 5% coefficient of variation. In my mind, that's excellent stuff. Because 68% of the time, we're going to sell between 950 and 1,050. And 95% of the time, we're going to sell between 900 and 1,100 pigs we're going to wean out of that system. And, there's 4% of the time that we're going to wean between 850 and 1,150. And invariably, my producers will say, well, I don't want 850 out of there. Well, then you're going to have to cut your standard deviation down some, or you're going to have to rewrite the rules of math. I'm not sure which, but if we look at most of our systems that are out there doing plus or minus 100 pigs with a 10% coefficient of variation, then obviously they're going to be way outside of these tolerance zones. So it's once again, what can we tolerate, and what costs are associated with that. And what are we going to do with those extra pigs if we've only got barn space for 1,000 pigs? It hasn't been a lot of fun selling them on the open market the last few months, I can tell you that. So if you look at wean weight and do the same thing, 12 pounds per pig, 5% coefficient variation, that's plus or minus 6 pounds. So my guys will say, hey, we don't want any pigs below 10 pounds. Great, either do I. So 99% of the time, if you're weaning at a 12 pound and you've got only a 5% coefficient of variation, you're going to be in there above 10 pounds. But if you're more closer to average and you've got 10%, then you're going to be below 10% at least 4%, or 10 pounds at least 4% of the time. Selling weight, one more example, and then we'll move on off coefficient of variation. Like I said, it's just one of my favorites, so hit it one more time. 270 pound, 13 pounds plus or minus standard deviation. We're at 5% coefficient variation, but a lot of times we're real thankful if we can be at 27 plus or minus 27 pounds at a 10% coefficient of variation, which means that only 68% of the pigs are going to be in that 40-pound window, 30 to 40-pound window. So what we try and do with this information is break it down much simpler, and we're working through different iterations to see which one resonates better with different people. And so what we're doing is we're going back to each of these site managers. David, you asked where you can make the change. Well, we try and make it locally, and that's either at the site that they manage or at the barns that they manage or the system that they manage. So we try and develop different reports for different people depending on their role in the system. And so right here we went out to Site 1, Site 2, Site 3, all getting wean pigs out of the same 5,000 sow flow, out of the same nursery system that's feeding into these finishers, and said, how are you doing? And then during this time period, we were trying to have an average market weight of 280, and we were trying to have a standard deviation lower than that of last year, which was in excess of 30 pounds. So we were really trying to get down to about 25 pounds. And if you look at site number 1, he's the big winner. He went from 260 to 280, and he went from 32-pound standard deviation to 25-pound standard deviation. Now, there are a few less numbers in there, and you can, I'm not applying any statistics to this. I'm just giving him an attaboy for doing what we asked him to do and trying to give him some feedback so that he at least knows, because he wasn't even getting the kill sheets back within 2 weeks before and rarely was taking time to look at them before we started reporting this information back to him. Look at Site 2, where we have a 280. They ended up taking the weight down, which invariably cut their standard deviation. Just as Bob mentioned earlier, you cut the average weight, you're going to lower standard deviation. You're going to lower variation, most likely. He did that, but still, he's not at the level that we want. And on the last gentleman, he went from 264 to 276 and cut his standard deviation. So he took the average weight up and kept the standard deviation down, which is good stuff because you would expect standard deviation on its own to increase as the average increases. So there's our application of standard deviation. I'm trying to get him to put coefficient of variation right on these reports, but there's some resistance within different organizations to do that at times, different producers to talk about that. Amazingly enough, David, we did. We had them I was going to talk about that on the first graph, where the pigs were all being sold a little too heavy, because we were breaking things down into 3 categories, David. And as long as they had at least 50% of the pigs in the average, in the just right box, they were getting 10 cents a carcass weight, or 10 cents a pig for every pig on the truck. So they put 160 pigs on the truck. They got $1.60 today for getting those pigs in there that were in the box, up to $1.60, which doesn't sound like much, but these guys are loading 10 to 20 trucks a week, and over time, they get a couple $1,000s a quarter bonus. And they were not only getting 10 cents for every pig that was in the box, David, but my producer was giving them 5 cents a pig for every pig that was heavy. So once again, we got what we incentivized them to do. It wasn't in the best interest of our company. We cut back there is no top-end bonus or heavyweight bonus anymore. It's all about around there 10 cents a pig or a number like that to get them in the box. And the box, we're working on getting smaller once we get some of these reports back to them in a way that they can act on them. The other thing we're doing is we're tracking this information over quarters. So we're looking at the average weight. Once again, this gentleman was at 260 with a 25-pound standard deviation. So we were trying to get him to 280. He got up to 280, and in the last quarter got down to 26-pound standard deviation. So we were feeling good about this. In a little bit, I'll show you how that relates back to economics of our system. So we're also able to show them the individual carcasses, something that they could never really visualize very well off a kill sheet, and show them exactly how many pigs in that time period were outside of the tolerances. We could show them on a percentage basis what that looked like. We have a nice wide bell-shaped curve. So we're trying to make that a lot narrower in our system. The other thing we're able to do is track that out by lot, because a lot of people will say, well, on the first cut we were rushed, we were pushed for space, we have to get those pigs out. But these guys were getting the pigs out of there on the first cut at 280, 280, 280. We just had too much variation going on in there, which means a lot of pigs are spilling both ways. So we may have to go in there, and as Dennis DePietri recommends, sell that first cut at about 260, which you're going to have a higher standard deviation. But this should look like a frown in his way of explaining it, and this should be a big smile. And my guys like that. If they get a smile and a frown on the page, they know they did the right thing. And if the average is right in there where we need it to be, that's good stuff. We can also then break it down for those that are more interested in more detailed data. We can break down all those bell-shaped curves by their individual cuts out of the barn so they can see how cut 1, cut 2, cut 3 did. And it's fine if this last cut's wide, but this cut has to be equally tall and thin to make up for the short and wide down here at the back end of the system. Once again, by putting this into the full value pig profit optimizer, we're able to punch in our numbers and crank out information such as this, where initially in the system we started out with a 25-pound standard deviation, 280-pound weight is where we ended up, and we're trying to talk to them about where we need to be. And at the time that we looked at this based on our hog corn price, the model said we need to be up at 290 average if we were going to have that level of spread, because the price had gone up and we'd fortunately locked in a bunch of corn in the system. So we felt pretty smart that day, but it all comes around eventually. On the next part, what we did then, so that was worth about $1 a head if we just took the pigs heavier over our feed costs. Now, once again, you have to say, well, but aren't there other costs associated with that? Will there be more time in the barn? Really, there wasn't any need for us or any incentive for us to pursue that dollar, because it wasn't $1 at the end of the day once you put your other cost into it. But what it did allow us to do, and does allow you to do, is to shift the weights and see how that affects the grid and affects the pigs. So we're able to show those pigs, and this is, as I was talking about earlier, the vector 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, where these pigs are all the ones that are not lean enough. These pigs are all the ones that are lean enough. These are the ones that are too light. These are the ones that are just right. These are the ones that are too heavy. And what we were able to find in our model is we needed to shift those pigs a bit heavier during that time period. And we could see what the economic effect is on that and what percentage of the pigs would be in each weight range by doing that. This was carcass weight range over here. This was percent yield across, or percent lean across the top of each of those. And this is as marketed, and this was optimized in that system. Then what we're able to do is talk to the guys about, hey, if we could cut our standard deviation down from 25 pounds to 18 pounds, what would that be worth to the system, and what would that do to our weight? So it kept our weight about 290, but gave us about $3 a pig, you know, and there was some additional costs associated with that. But still, there was an incentive for us to pursue that $3 a pig during that time period. So, yes, sir. Yes.
Where did that $3 come from? Was that by heavier weight or better feed utilization? Where did that come from?
What that came from is $1 of that came from taking those pigs heavier, and $2 of that came from reducing variation and not having pigs spill out of both sides of the box on the marginal return. As I've talked about, first we focus on throughput, efficiency, and quality, and then we work at reducing variation within our system. And as you know, it's not like we're just focused on one and not doing the other one. We want it all, but some days we just want to have the guys show up and do the job. So if we look at reducing variation, birth weights, wean weights, nursery out weights, final finishing weights, those are all areas of opportunity for us. And then as David did so well, he went into the fishbone analysis with that. But I just break it down into 5 basics of health is king, nutrition, genetics, environment, and management. And of course, as a veterinarian, I'm going to say health is king for you production guys, but a little self-promotion in there. And one of the key things as you're working within your systems is to explain to them that, you know, we're measuring the voice of the system. This is statistical process control. We are measuring the voice of the system. We are not blaming an individual. the gentleman, when I showed that chart, he felt so blamed and, oh, I'm doing a lousy job and I had no idea. No. We've done a lousy job of explaining what we want and defining what we want in different parts of our industry. And we need to adjust our system to allow you to achieve the goals that we're setting forth. And so we're not trying to blame any of the production guys within the system. We're trying to more clearly define their goals and more accurately and timely report that information back to them so that they can achieve what is in the best interest of our company and incentivize them the right way, David. So there are multiple interventions that we've looked at, and as I said before, you know, as Joel told you how to do these things right, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do. And how we're loading the pens, I know all this stuff about you can't really change the variation in the pens in the barn, overall barn, but we used to sort a lot of pigs. What we're doing now is we're sorting a few big pigs into each pen, because when it comes to the end and we go and top out pens, here we had all the big pigs in one pen, or we had them randomly sorted throughout the barn, and we were pulling out the big pigs, disrupting just those pens and crowding up the other pigs. Since we're stocking these pigs pretty heavy, we're trying to load them so that there's a few big pigs in each pen, hopefully seeding it so that at the end we can go through and top a few pigs out of each pen and give everybody equal space after the top out barns. We're focusing a lot on who's marketing the pigs and that someone's marketing the pigs. We're auditing to make sure that someone's marketing the pigs, because at 3 in the morning no one knows really if the guys the day before marked the pigs or not. And when they get there and the pigs aren't marked, it's actually easier for them to load a truck, because they all go if they're not marked. So, and the other thing is we found out that the guy that we need to incentivize, David, we were incentivizing the production supervisors that were going around, not the contract partners. We're incentivizing the production supervisors, and they quickly figured out that if they were getting an incentive, they need to be the guy on the front of the gate, because if there's 3 guys loading the barn, there's only one guy that determines what pigs get on the truck. It's the guy at the front gate that decides which ones get pushed back. Everybody else is just pushing them forward as fast as they can. So we're working on getting people to do some things, creative things, weigh some pigs out there, put their weights on them before they go through and mark the barn, so that they've got some sort of visual comparison of different weights so that they can at least get in the ballpark of where the weights are. A lot of these guys don't market every week, so they'll go 3 months without marketing, and then it'll be theirs for the next 2 months, the solid that we're taking out of their barns. So that gets them in the ballpark. We're trying to get more cuts per barn. Dr. Roof is pushing getting the gooseneck trailer back so we can go around and pick up pigs every day from each site. We kid around a little bit about that at lunch. But there's a lot of truth that just because a semi holds 160 pigs, that may not be the best way to market. And from a biosecurity standpoint, I don't want them to go to one site and back up to one barn. But there may have to be a little give and take on that so that we can get where we need to be. We may need to get a truck going around each site and bringing them to a depot. We're trying to figure that out within our systems, what the economic return is there versus the biosecurity and other risk associated with that. I'm not currently doing any consulting for any sort scale companies, but I keep trying to tell my clients with the amount of financial opportunity that there is. You know, I showed you just one where there was $3 a pig. On some of the analysis, if we could get that down to where the pigs are all in the 30-pound window, it's easily $8 to $10 a pig. And we can put in sort scales for that kind of money. Now, my producers in southern Indiana put in sort scales, and they ripped them out. So they are always like, you can go get the one out of the front yard whenever you want. Because it hurt average daily gain, and it hurt feed conversion. It hurt them. Well, as you talk with Dennis DePietri and other people more versed in statistics than I, that any time you tighten the variation, you are going to hurt the average. Yeah, the reason the average daily gain went down is because we're no longer selling 350-pound pigs. We're not selling those heavy pigs, so your average daily gain is going to go down. But that's why Dennis used to write those articles like I do, all that, take out to my producers and say, hey, if you improve average daily gain by $0.1, that's worth $1 a pig. If you lower feed conversion by $0.1, that's worth $1 a pig. No, those are individual numbers that are part of a partial budget analysis that need to go at least into a little bit of analysis before you decide what the dollar value is of changing those parameters. Because if you can change and cheapen up the diet, it's probably not a bad thing to hurt average daily gain just a little bit. And if you need to add more barns, you can oftentimes afford to do that versus spend more money on feed. So if we look at sort scales, I think there's a lot of opportunity. As one of my clients said to me, Matt, how many of these pigs in the sort scale pen do you think weigh between 270 and 290? And I said, well, probably 75, 80% of them. He goes, no, Matt, they all do. That's the point. And that's what we can't seem to do in any of our systems that I've talked about up here. We haven't been able to get all the pigs in that range, no matter what we've done. If you look at the transportation schedule, logistics, you look at the packer contracts that complicate things. Even if you have a contract with one packer, they may have different weights that they're on different time periods, and you want to be sure that you're matching the pigs with your contracts, because invariably the pigs that weigh 290 may go on the 270 contract, and the pigs that weigh 270 may go on the 290 contract, if those types of things would exist in this industry. So areas of opportunity, as a veterinarian, once again, I talk about proper use of vaccinations, proper use of injectable and water medications, proper timing of feed medication pulses, paling step-up programs, energy management, fat management, depending on the system and what we're trying to accomplish. And then I'm still working on trying to come up with a nice, simple one-page report that I can report back to people that gives them everything they need, showing the individual spread of the pigs that were under their control, how many marginal dollars over feed cost, and this is a time when nothing was fun, but we were trying to lose less money than my previous examples. So it basically showed them that there was $1.60 per pig if they would have just sold those pigs a little bit more in the green zone. So those are different things that we're still experimenting with today.